That's a great question. It's a big question. I've discussed this in detail in my book, Old Testament Law for Christians. And in a nutshell, first of all, the book of Genesis already refers to pure and impure animals when they got on the ark, right? And there had to be 7 of the pure animals because they were sacrificable. And if you had only 2 animals in a species and you sacrifice one, the male or the female, then you make the species extinct, okay? So God says to have more than one, and then Noah was able to sacrifice as burnt offering the so-called clean animals, the pure animals, meaning that they're fit to eat, okay? Now, God doesn't need human food, but human beings offer human food to him, which is like the food that they eat as fellowship to him. In fact, we know that because in Numbers chapter 28, verse 2, I believe it is, there it says, God says, referring to the morning and evening burnt offering, my food, and it uses the word lachmi, which is a word for food, my lechem. That word can be used more broadly for bread, but it's a word for food in general. And so this is a token that God accepts of human food. So the fact that already in Genesis, in that narrative, you have pure and impure animals, that distinction is significant. Now, later on in the book of Leviticus, you have in Leviticus 11 and in Deuteronomy 14, you have lists of animals that are pure or impure. Now, scholars have tried to figure out what's the rationale for, what's the reason why animals are pure or impure. Because it only gives rules of thumb. In other words, when it comes to 4-legged animals, quadrupeds, it says that if they chew the cud, and if they have split hooves, like cows, sheep, goats, and so on, then you can eat them. Horses wouldn't work because they don't have split hooves. All right. Pigs don't work because they don't meet all of the criteria. Okay. And so there are rules of thumb why you should eat this one, not that one. So the camel is ruled out, for example, and then certain birds, it has to name, it names the birds that you can eat in that particular setting. And then it doesn't refer to fish. Oh yeah, it does. Scales and fins. That's right. It refers to fish. If they have scales and fins. Now, there are various reasons that scholars have given for this. One of my classmates, Edwin Firmage, wrote an article, or maybe 2 articles, in Vetus Testamentum, that's Latin for Old Testament, that the ones that were edible by humans are the ones that were sacrificable to God. Now, that's a little bit tricky because which comes first, the chicken or the egg? It's a little bit, is it because of this or because of that? Or is this the reason for that? Or is this the reason for that? Other possibilities are health, okay? Health or hygiene. And we know that that works to some extent. During World War II, there were American military personnel stationed in the South Pacific, and they got tired of their dry rations that they had to eat, and they decided to pull some creatures out of the sea, and they did, and they ate them, and some of them got sick and died. And so the military contacted an ichthyologist, that's a fish scientist in California, and said, how do we know which ones we can eat and which ones we can't? The fish scientists, if they have scales and fins, they are always safe to eat. He happened to be a Seventh-day Adventist. He happened to know the law in Leviticus, but the reason was from science, okay, from his scientific background. So that works to some extent, all right? Now, my colleague, Jiří Moskala, who's the dean of the seminary where I teach right here at Andrews University, wrote a Ph.D. dissertation in which he points out that the animals that are so-called clean or pure are ones that are not predatories. They're not predators. So you don't eat cats or dogs or lions and tigers and stuff like that, right? They're not predators. And they are closest to the creation ideal of vegetarian and so on and so forth. So he links it to creation. So that's a possibility. Now, these are all speculative, hypothetical. The creation one works the best overall, I think. But the reason given at the end of Leviticus 11 is in verses 44 and 45. The motive given, not the underlying reason for saying why this one and not that one. But the underlying reason for obeying what the Lord says is that you should be holy as I am holy. So there are animals that are associated with not being impure, because the impure ones and so on, that's incompatible with your holiness as people of God. Now, it's true that there in Leviticus 11, it does refer to some rituals which you are to do if you contact a carcass of certain kind of animals. Then you're to do this ritual to make yourself pure. But the basic distinctions between pure and impure animals in that list, there is no ritual remedy. If you eat a pig, it's simply violating God's law. You've committed a sin because you've broken God's law. So it's a moral law in that sense, okay? Not just a ritual law. There's no ritual remedy for violation. Another thing that is characteristic of ritual laws is that the reason for them was not around before the building of the sanctuary. Well, we talked about Noah. That was around before. Another thing is, after the sanctuary or temple is gone, there's no reason to keep them. Now you look at Daniel in Daniel chapter 1. What did Daniel do? He was given the food from the king's table, no doubt included unclean meat, and he refused it because of his holiness as a person of God. And God honored that and then gave him visions and dreams. Holiness means that we can be closer to God, right? And so where was Daniel? The temple was destroyed. It was like 500 miles from where he lived and a long way away. So it's not just impurity that the person becomes impure and therefore they can't contact holy things that are centered at the temple. It's personal holiness. It's holiness of the person. As it says in the Leviticus chapter 11, verses 44 and 45, you have to be holy. It's not talking about just you in relation to the sanctuary, but you yourself, wherever you are, you should be holy. Now, what does it say in 1 Peter? I think it's 1 Peter 1. Is it 2 Peter or 1 Peter? 1, 15 and 16. It quotes Leviticus 11, 44 and 45. You shall be holy as I am holy. And it's talking to Christians in all of your conduct. I'll see if I can pull it up here. I think
yes, I found the first chapter and the 15 and 16 verse. Yeah.
Okay, 1 Peter. It's in 1 Peter 1, 15 and 16. Instead, as he who called you is holy, be holy yourselves in all your conduct, for it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. And that's quoted. Now, I'm reading from the NRSV UE. That's the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Bible, which is New Revised Standard Version, which is the latest translation to come out. And it has a little asterisk here, and it says Leviticus 11:44. So it's quoting from that according to this version, which is right. And so if this is saying you need to be holy as they were holy. And of course, you have in Exodus 19, verse 6, that the Israelites were told by God that they were going to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And here Peter is alluding to this. You need to be holy people for God. Now, there are New Testament passages that appear to contradict this. For example, where in Acts chapter 10, Peter had a dream or a vision in the middle of the day at his siesta time, and there was a sheet let down from heaven with all kinds of animals, pure and impure. And he says, I've never eaten anything common or unclean. Now, that word common is not an Old Testament category. It's referring to in the New Testament period, the Second Temple period, a common animal was one that was actually a pure animal according to the Old Testament, but it was in the same field with impure animals. Like if you had sheep together with pigs, then the sheep you wouldn't eat because now it's common. Okay. And this is the whole point there. Now, Acts is illustrating not about diet. It's not about diet. It's about interactions with Gentiles. And the whole point is that just because you're a Jew, you can't interact with a Gentile who you think is unclean and you won't be common because you're associated with them. Okay. The word is koinos, common. And so then when it says, I've never eaten anything common or unclean, and God says, don't worry about it. The point is, well, the common category, for one thing, is not in Leviticus or in Deuteronomy 14. And furthermore, the whole thing is an illustration. It's not teaching you about diet at all. Now, another passage that is misused is in Mark chapter 7. And this is misread by biblical translations and scholars. Mark 7. And if I remember correctly, it's Mark 7. But what's talking about is about eating clean and unclean foods.
Yes, 7:15, right?
Thank you. Okay. All right. So here I'm quoting from the NRSV UE. It says in verse 15, there is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. Okay. Now, his point is not about food, for one thing. His discussion is about what a person thinks or says, that what goes in, what comes out. He's talking about moral things and ethical, particularly speech and so on. But when it says there's nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile. Let's see. Here, I found it. It's in verse 19. Look at verse 18. So, do you not see, verse 18, do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? And then it says, thus he declared all foods clean. I'm quoting from this latest, very authoritative NRSV updated edition, and it is dead wrong. That is not what the Greek says. Where it says, thus he declared all foods clean. If you look at the Greek, it doesn't say that at all. It has a participle in Greek, and it says, thus purifying all foods. Nothing about declaring, nothing about him saying anything. That is not in the Greek. Thus purifying all foods. In other words, it's talking about the elimination process of the human body, that food goes in the stomach, and then it goes out, purifying the food. That is to say, the body purifies it into the excrement by having a bowel movement. Okay? It says nothing about declaring all foods clean. And that has been read in by scholars and put in these translations so everybody thinks that, and is absolutely not in the text. So that's an example. There is nothing in the New Testament that is ruling out those laws as being obsolete. And in fact, there are other places where it says, Paul says, don't let anyone judge you about food. He's talking about things that were regarded as food. Clean meats, unclean meats were not regarded as food. He's talking about ascetic practices where people were abstaining from things like, for example, I'll give you an example. I heard about a congregation of a group of people that were fanatical about food, and they said, you can't be a member of this congregation unless you're vegan. You can only be vegan. You can't eat any animal products. No eggs, milk, cheese, nothing. You have to be vegan. And not only that, the pastor has to be raw. He has to only eat raw food. See? Now, it's that kind of fanaticism that Paul was talking about. I'm not saying that to be a vegan is a fanatic. I think that it can be good for your health to be vegan. I have very good friends. Gary Rensburg is vegan. I think that's a great idea. I'm not saying that's fanatical. What is fanatical is to hold it over people's head and make that a test of membership in your group, in your church, as a law from God, because the Bible never says that. Okay? And so that's what the New Testament is talking about. It's never ruling out. Anyway, I haven't found compelling evidence. Look at my book and see if you think, and make up your own mind. And it's not in, that is, these laws, yes, they have to do with a kind of purity, but it's not just the physical ritual impurity that was temporary with the temple to make sure that you didn't touch anything that was holy that's here on earth. We don't have to worry about being impure in that sense. Because for one thing, and interestingly, there was a woman who's in charge of a large Christian women's organization who wrote to me, because there are some churches in the world where they think that women should not be on the pulpit, which is sacred space behind the pulpit, like preaching or whatever, because they might be impure. It might be their period or something like that. Well, I wrote a couple of articles in which I pointed out that those rules no longer apply to us because Christ is in his heavenly temple. There is no existing holy space on earth anywhere, which is a great thing. We don't have to fight over space in the Middle East, or, you got Hindus and Muslims fighting over sacred space. They kill each other by the thousands, and there's crusades and all the rest. There's no holy space on earth like that. None, anywhere. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together, Jesus can come and be with us, with his spirit, okay? But given that there's no holy space, you don't have to protect the holy space. We call our churches sanctuaries because we meet there, but they're not sanctuaries like the Israelite sanctuary temple. They're holy because the holy Shekinah is dwelling there. And furthermore, and this is quite amusing actually, who is the most impure person in the whole congregation? According to Numbers 19, if you're in the same body, the same room as a dead body, you're under the same roof as a dead body, you become impure. So you have to be purified with the ashes of the red heifer mixed with water, ritually purified. And that ritual has to be done by the son of the high priest, okay? And there's no son of the high priest around anymore. So you can't have those ashes anymore. So if you're under the same roof as a dead body, who's the person who is most often under the same roof as a dead body? Huh? The pastor. The pastor. He visits people when someone dies. He performs funerals. He's the most impure person in the whole congregation. Has he been purified with the ashes of the red heifer? No. The pastor, therefore, cannot stand behind the pulpit and preach. Utter nonsense. So it's all inconsistent. So you can, and you know what happens is people pick on women. They always pick on women because women have menstruate. Men could be impure too, from nocturnal emissions, from sexual intercourse, from other things. Leviticus 15 starts off with the impurities of men. And so this kind of physical ritual impurity no longer applies to us today. We don't have to have deacons and deaconesses standing at the door when we have the ritual of the Last Supper or communion or Eucharist, whatever you call it, asking us questions like, what time of the month is it? Or what did you do with your spouse last night? We don't have to worry about that because Christ is in heaven. We're all impure in that sense. It doesn't matter. But the diet is a different kind of impurity, and that still applies.
I'm shocked. I didn't know all this, so thank you so much, Professor Gane. And I just want to ask a question because my friends don't know answer. Me also. Why are unclean animals not meant to be eaten? What is the core sense? Because it seems it's not just for health reason. Because, for example, horse meat is fine, and even meat of some unclean animals is healthier than the clean ones. So, is there a deeper reason behind this?
Right. There may be more than one reason because it's true that the Arabs eat camel, okay? And apparently there's nothing wrong with camel. And so to just say it's all just on the basis of health is a little bit difficult, okay? And of course, the best thing is for health is to be vegetarian, like I am. By the way, if vegetarians eat vegetables, what do humanitarians eat? Yeah, you can think about that. Okay, so however, there can be more than one reason because horses, okay, and in the Bible are used in battle. Okay, donkeys were used for various kinds of things, but and you aren't allowed to offer a donkey to Yahweh, the God of Israel. You can't offer a horse to him. So the animals that are ones that he accepts in sacrifice. So I think my friend Edwin Firmage has a point there. The ones that are acceptable in sacrifice are ones that are regarded as holy. So these are gentle domestic animals like sheep and goats and cows and oxen, donkeys, not donkeys, but cows and oxen. These are just gentle grazing domestic animals, and birds that are gentle birds like doves and pigeons could also be eaten. So it seems to have to do with the animal's diet and whether they can be allowed as sacrifices. And of course, that could be part of why God would accept them as sacrifices. They're not predatory. They wouldn't be associated with warfare and that kind of thing, and so on. And so we don't know exactly why all the reasons. It could be more than one reason, but God just says, okay, these are the ones that you can eat. And trust me, it's radical obedience. Do we always know all the reasons why God says something? Do we always do? I mean, for example, the whole debate about LGBTQ right now. Okay, so God prohibits in Leviticus and in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20 prohibits homosexual relations between men. Okay, and do we understand all the reasons behind all that? We may not, and yet we have to just believe this comes from God. Either we trust him or we don't. Radical obedience. Radical obedience is like the way we trust parents, and our children trust us. And this is a very, very important thing. I mean, for example, many years ago in Australia, which is where I come from, up in northern New South Wales or Queensland, there was a woman walking along a dusty road with her 3 small children. It was a hot day, and all of a sudden she said, "Stop." And the children obeyed and they stopped. They didn't say, "Oh, mommy." No, mummy. It's mummy in Australia. Okay. Mummy, I don't want to stop. I want to keep going. Just keep on barging on. Right then at that moment, a big, huge, very aggressive brown snake slithered across in front of them on the road. That snake is very aggressive, incredibly poisonous, much more than rattlesnakes in the United States. Australia has more poisonous snake categories than any other continent, and somebody would have died. Okay. And so that lady, her name was Mrs. Nelson, and one of those children was Allison Nelson, who became a concert pianist, and I heard her play. And it was radical obedience because the children accepted the word from the mother because she was their mother. They didn't understand, and they stopped. And God is calling us to radical obedience, to follow him, even when we don't know all the reasons why. And eventually, he'll explain it to us when we get to the next life.
Great. And I read an article from Yuri Moskala, and he draws some parallels between those dietary laws and Genesis creation account from first and second chapter. So are those indicators that this is something different from ritual laws that are connected to impurity and something?
Well, yes, in terms of the characteristics of the ritual laws that have to do with impurity with the sanctuary temple are, one is the need for them originates with the construction and dedication of the sanctuary, and is not dependent upon that. So is dependent upon that. That is, its life depends upon it. Because for one thing, if you have a severe ritual impurity and you have to do a purification ritual, it can involve a sacrifice. It requires a priest and going to the authorized altar, which no longer exists. Okay, so if you have those severe impurities like scaly skin disease, so-called leprosy, and then you have to be purified from that, it involves a ritual. It involves the temple and the priest, the sanctuary and the priest. Okay, that's one. And then another thing is that that it's simply a prohibition. It's not saying if you do this, then you will become impure, and then you'll have to undergo this. It's just simply saying, do this or don't do this. Okay. And in the case of the dietary laws, it's just, these are the ones that you're permitted to eat. These are the ones you're not permitted to eat. Now, it's true that there are some sexual violations. One of them most people don't know about. Jewish people know about, but Christians generally don't. And that is in Leviticus 18 and 20, it says that you're not allowed to have sex during the woman's menstrual period. Okay, which means your wife, because you shouldn't be doing it with someone other than your wife, right? And so the woman is impure during that time, and you're not allowed to have sexual intercourse with her during that time. Now, that's just a blanket prohibition, and it's among a bunch of moral laws in Leviticus 18 and 20. They're all moral laws. You've got adultery, you've got incest, you've got homosexual practice, you've got Moloch worship. It's all moral laws in those chapters. This one thing relates to physical ritual impurities, because in Leviticus chapter 18, it says that if You have sexual intercourse. When there's menstrual impurity that gets on you, the man becomes impure as well. Why is this a contradiction? Milgrom suggested, I think he's right, in Leviticus 15, it's an accident. It's unintentional. So it's a violation, it's a sin to do this intentionally. You know it's your wife's period, and you go ahead and have sex, which sounds like a disgusting thing, but some people do. Some people want that. Even some women want that. I've even heard of one. And yet there's another scenario where if you're starting to have sex and oops, we didn't know. It turns out that I'm not going to go into the details here, but it turns out that her period had begun and you didn't know it. Then that would be a physical ritual impurity that would be then remediable. You could have a remedy for that impurity through the sacrificial system. And so that shows that kind of difference between those two. And so just because Christians haven't known about that, does that mean that we should ignore it? Because most Christians don't. I pointed out at the beginning in the introduction to my book, Old Testament Law for Christians, that there is no one group that keeps all of these things the way that is described in this book. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing that when we learn. And there's a benefit to that. And I have a friend who's an OBGYN, obstetrics gynecologist surgeon. He's retired now, who told me that there is actually a health benefit to abstaining from sex during menstruation when the woman's body is being purified from that. So these are just examples. In other words, you can't just take one law, say this is in this category, this is in this, and therefore they're all the same. They're not. Different ones have different reasons for application, different ways to apply them, and you have to read carefully the biblical text. And that's what my book, Old Testament Law for Christians, is all about.
Great. Professor Gane, last, I promise no more questions. Just what would you say to people that still believe that if a temple will be rebuilt in the future, then we should also bring sacrifices and other things? So what would you say to them? And that's it, yeah.
Okay. I've been to Jerusalem. I've seen, there's a little museum there in the old city in Jerusalem, in which they showed that they had already built the menorah, that is the 7-branched candlestick that is to go in their rebuilt temple. I understand that there are people getting ready for it. Now, one of the crucial things that has been needed for a rebuilt temple is a red heifer, a red cow. Because in Numbers chapter 19, you have to be able to purify the priests from corpse contamination, because they've been in touch with dead bodies and so on. You have to purify them. How do you do it? We need a red or reddish cow. They've bred such a cow in, I think, Minnesota or somewhere like this. There is a reddish cow, and they are talking about how to use that. Okay. There's also another key obstacle to having a third temple, which is being removed, and that is DNA testing. We can test the DNA of Jewish people, especially named Cohen, which means priests, to see who are actually priests that go back to the priestly lineage, because we've got to have the authorized people. So there are people, and it's all being moving in that direction. There's a problem, because the place where the temple has to go, according to the best evidence, and I could go into that, the evidence, and show you pictures and everything, is precisely where the golden dome of on the mountain of Mount Zion is located. I've been inside there. I've been underneath the rock where Abraham was supposed to have offered Isaac. According to the Quran, it was Ishmael. And that was right where the temple was. That may have been where the Holy of Holies was, in fact, right there, according to Le'en Rittmeyer. And he has evidence for that. So the problem is, in order to build the third temple, you have to demolish this temple there, and that, along with the El Aqsa Mosque, a large mosque right there. These are the places where Muhammad made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and he got to the furthest extent from Jerusalem, and then he was taken from heaven. And this is the third most holy Muslim site after Mecca and Medina, which is in Arabia. And the Muslim people, and I've heard them, we have friends, Muslim friends, and they call that place of Jerusalem Al-Quds, which in Arabic is the holy. That's holy space. That's why they're going to be careful about sending drones to attack Jerusalem, because they don't want to nail their holy space. Okay. And so what happens if you build a third temple? What happens? You have to demolish the third sacred Muslim holy site. And the instant you do that, the second you do that, you have just started World War III. Okay. And that could very well happen. If I were in Israel visiting and that happened, I would jump in the Mediterranean and start swimming, because World War III is going to be happening before you can get out of there. And then studying the end of the prophecy of Daniel 11, verses 40 and following, I'm seeing evidence, and I can't go into that. That's another whole presentation, that we have the key players right now, all poised, ready to go. And we just have to have a trigger event, some kind of match that lights the flame and everything blows up. And that could be one way that it blows up. Biblically speaking, there is no biblical reason for there to be a third temple. Now, there are futurist dispensationalists who read literally some of the prophecies that make it look like there has to be a temple in the future and so on. But a closer study of the prophecies shows that the ones that were to be fulfilled literally were conditional. They were conditional prophecies on the Israelite people accepting the Messiah and so on. And those are not going to be fulfilled literally, but they will be fulfilled in principle. There will be a new Jerusalem. The Lord will have a sacred place for us to be there, and so on and so forth. There will be a major battle, like the battle in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog and Magog. There will be a major battle. It's in Revelation 20, between all the people marching on the holy city of Jerusalem. So these are fulfilled in principle, but they're not fulfilled in all the details, because these were in classical conditional prophecies, conditional upon the restoration. The book of Daniel is apocalyptic. The book of Revelation is apocalyptic. Both of those are unconditional kinds of prophecy, and those do not predict a future earthly temple. They're talking about the heavenly temple in the future. It's true that Daniel is talking about the restoration of the earthly temple, which happened in Second Temple times. But after that, there is going to be inauguration of another temple, and that's referring to the temple in heaven. We can't go into that. That's another whole discussion.